Welcome back to the Floriani Software Fundamentals video series on FTCU. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator. And in this section we're going to continue working with text. This is part 3. And in this section what we're going to be covering is working with TrueType fonts, as well as some advanced text controls. So just to review, remember that there are several different types of fonts that we can work with in the software. And one of those is called TrueType fonts. And remember that those are the fonts that Windows uses. And they are not normally stitches. They're in fact outlines or vectors in the shape of letters. And Windows knows how to use them in things like Word and PowerPoint, etc. And those are the fonts that you find out in the real world because most people, are not embroiderers. So for example, somebody brings you a logo and you have to duplicate the font that they used in the logo, chances are that that font was originally a TrueType font. And so the ability to use TrueType fonts and to convert them into stitches within the software is very, very powerful. So I mentioned that matching up a logo or a font that exists in the real world is one use of TrueType fonts. Of course, if for some reason that any of the hundreds of built-in fonts that we give you don't float your boat, then you can switch to a TrueType font and find one of those. Now, TrueType fonts come with Windows. There's an awful lot that come with it, but there's literally hundreds of thousands of them out there that you can download. Some are free, some you have to buy, but you can download and install those fonts. And that's critical because when you download a font, it's usually going to be a TTF file, which is the file extension for TrueType font. TTF means TrueType font. Most people think that if they just download that, it'll suddenly appear in their system. And that's not true. What you need to do once it's downloaded is install it. And usually you can do that in Windows with a right click on it, and one of those options will be to install the font. Once it's installed into Windows, then you'll have it available in FTCU. But one thing I want to point out is that it will not be available if you download, install it, while FTCU is running. It will not suddenly appear. You'll have to stop FTCU, so close down the program and restart it, and when you do that, it will appear. So there are a couple different ways to get to TrueType fonts within the software. And probably the most commonly used way is to use your normal text control. So if I come up here to my text and I click, say, normal text and put some text in the screen, normally what I would get would be my built-in fonts. But this little box right here, if I check it to change to TrueType fonts, now my font list will be all of the TrueType fonts that are built into my Windows system or that I've installed into Windows. So I can scroll through here. If I hover over them, I will see a preview of what they look like. So let me just go get a very common one that everyone will have, and that's Arial. So there's normal Arial, Arial Black, narrow, rounded. So lots of different Arials. Let's just pick Arial Black because it's nice and bold. And now if I click Apply, it will take that Arial font and put it in here. So now I'm using that font from Windows, and the software automatically converted it into stitches for me. So if I want to choose a different font, like for example, let's choose Arial Narrow and click Apply. Now it's going to change that to look like that font. So you can use just about any font that's available in a TrueType font in the software. So when I use this mode of using TrueType fonts with the TTF checkbox with my normal text modes, and by the way, this also works with text on a circle and text on a path and vertical text. You can still use TrueType fonts. You'll have to check the TTF box in those particular properties boxes and choose the font, but they are available to use. When I do that, I still have all of my normal text controls, so I can adjust the kerning. For example, I can move this over, I can adjust the envelopes, etc. So I can do anything with TrueType text that I could do with my built-in fonts as long as I use this particular mode right here. Now there's another way to work with TrueType fonts in the software, and that is called Import TrueType Font Outlines, and that's done with this control right here. It's Import TrueType Font Artwork, And if I click it, I get a different dialog. This time, what it's going to want me to do is type in the text and pick my font. And I can only use one line of text in this mode, but I could type something in. So for example, let me put in just the capital M here, and I'm going to select my font. So again, I can select my font. Now this looks a little different. This looks like a normal Windows font selection here. So if I want to stay with Arial and I want Arial Black, let me pick that. I can pick a size here, but what we're going to be bringing in is actually artwork or outlines or vectors. And so the size here really doesn't matter because I can resize it anywhere I want to when it's in the software. So I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to leave it at the default and click OK. And when I say OK, it is going to bring in a TrueType outline. So this is no longer text. This is now just an artwork outline. And if I zoom into it by double clicking my magnifying glass, you'll see that what I have here is artwork, and it is filled in because my fill in my properties box is turned on. If I want to see it without the fill, I could turn that off and click apply, and I would just simply see the outline. Now it's up to me to assign what kind of text I want to. Now it's up to me to assign what kind of stitches I want to go in here. And typically what we do with text is we put in satin stitches. So one of the stitch styles down here that we just touched on is called Auto Satin, and this is probably the best one to use with TrueType font outlines. If I click it, it will go and put in a satin stitch outline here, and if I look at it in 1:1, so I'm zoomed away and I'm at 1200%, and I turn on 3D, you'll see that that character looks pretty good. So Auto Satin did a pretty good job with filling that in. And of course, if I put in a whole word, so let me actually delete this one, and I'll do the same thing again. And this time I'll put in my name. I'll put in M-A-R-K, and I'll say OK. And it will allow me to resize it if I want to. So if I want to make it a little bit bigger, I can do that. Again, since these are vectors, I can make them any size I want to, and I can fill them in with stitches. So let me just put in my Auto Satin. If I wanted to use a fill, if these were really, really big, I could. So let me just do that. I'll put in an Auto Satin, and now I've got that done. Now, the advantage of doing it this way is it's real easy to select the type of fill that you want in here, and you can get various specialty effects that you can't get with the normal fills in text. And also, it is really useful to use this to create appliques. All right. Now, one of the things that you have to understand, though, is that I don't have any of my normal text controls. These are just stitches. If I go over to my sequence view here right now, I've got just a separate satin path for each one of these characters. All right. They are not text. So if I need to change this K into a C, for example, I have to delete those stitches, go back to my import TrueType font artwork control, bring in a C, and put it in here. So this, while it's a very interesting way to work, isn't quite as powerful from a word perspective. So while this is a very interesting way to work, it's different than text mode because you don't have your normal text controls. Now, I talked about appliques. Let me select all of this and delete it. Let me bring in an M again. And just put in an M here and say OK. And I'm going to actually make this very, very big. All right, so I'm going to make it, in fact, let me use my transform here, and I've made it 3.4 inches high. So that looks pretty good. So I'm actually going to bring it down into the center here. Now, if I want to convert this into an applique, I would come here to my applique tab. And so if I want to convert this into an applique, I would come down here to my applique style, and I would click it, and it would put in an applique path. And what that puts in is my, not only my covering stitch, but also my tack down and my placement line. So this is a great way to make applique letters is using the import TrueType font artwork control and then using your one click down here to convert into appliques. So that's the basics of working with TrueType fonts in the software as opposed to the built-in fonts. Now there are times when working with fonts and text that we want to be able to take more control over the individual stitches than we have the ability to do when we have a text object, because this right now that we're looking at, if I select it in text mode, you'll see that it has got all of my text controls, but over here there's not much I can do with it in terms of changing stitch types or any of that. I can do a lot of that here, but I have to do it to the whole text object. If I want to be able to take control over the individual characters and do something strange with them, I have to make this no longer be a text object. And the way I do that is if I go to normal select mode and I right click on the text, one of my options is break up text. So when I do that, it's going to convert it into individual satin stitch objects. So if I come over here and I look at my sequence view, I'll see that I have a satin path for the M, a satin path for the Y, a satin path for the T, etc. So this is no longer text. Now, this allows us again to take control over what's happening with the stitches here, but you have to be very careful because this is a one-way trip. There's no way to go back once you break up the text to go back to having regular text unless you were able to do an undo. If you just did it by mistake, you could undo it, but the minute you start manipulating this, etc., you're not going to be able to go back to text unless you undo all the way back. So the take home from this is if you want to break up this text, make sure you have all the characters exactly the way you want them before you do that. So that's one of the advanced controls that you can do with breaking up the text.